Yeah, so look, without getting too political, I suppose, in terms of our own personal views on the politics of it, let's just set the scene here. So the government in the last few weeks has set out that it is their intention to introduce a mandatory government ID for every citizen, every adult citizen in Britain. This is something, of course, that's been trailed by various governments, not all, but probably since 1997, the advent of the Blair government in 1997. I think it's fair to say, and again, I don't mean to be political, but that Tony Blair is quite the fan of digital ID. He also may be seen to be pulling some strings behind the scene, and so I think it's fair to say when it comes to this government. So that's going to happen. It's going to take a while, particularly not just the legislation, but the infrastructure, I guess. How do you see that, I guess, in terms of what the government are saying, the purpose of this is, and the cynics watching this might be believing that what governments say and what they really mean are two different things. I couldn't possibly comment, by the way. But the government, of course, is saying that the introduction of digital IDs is specifically to help the problem of illegal immigration. Do you buy that? Do you think it's something else? And do you think that a government-mandated national digital ID scheme is authentic in that it's necessary, that it's needed?
No.
Okay.
So
that was decisive.
I think it's kind of impossible to divorce the politics from this topic. And by the way, it is a blue paper topic. I mean, it really is a visceral emotion.
It's very polarising. I find on social media very, very polarising.
And you know why that is, right? It's because it fundamentally goes down to the relationship between the state and the citizen, right? And that is why it's such a polarising topic and why it's so important to so many people. So to answer your question, I think it's important to understand what the government have been saying for the last 3 or 4 years and then what they've been saying for the last 3 weeks, right? So for the last 3-4 years, the strategy of government and the private sector has been a very, very good one, right? And that has been that we all have a series of physical ID documents now. So we all have a driving license, passport, military ID card, veterans card, various different ones. And what the government have wanted to do is bring out digital versions of those, right? So the citizens, you can have a physical driving license, you can have the digital one or both, right? Which makes perfect sense, right? I absolutely support it.
So that's okay in your book?
Yeah, it is, right? Yeah. Because what that isn't is a national ID.
Yeah.
Right? All that is a digital version of things that you've already got, right? And so, it does make a lot of sense. If you think about it at the moment, we've got physical documents. So when you need to prove your ID remotely, you have to find it, get out of a drawer, get out your wallet, take photos of it, make sure it's not blurred and you haven't got glare on it, etc. It's not a great experience. If there's a digital version of that on your phone, and so if you need to prove your ID, you can either take your card out and hand it over to somebody, or if you're doing it remotely, rather than taking photos of it, you can just use the digital one on your phone, right?
Yeah, you can either show it or send it.
Perfectly fine,
yeah.
Right? And by the way, the public are supportive of that, right? And it's not infringing on anyone. It's not centralised ID issued by the government. So that's fine. And it also makes sense for UK PLC because it's much, much cheaper for those people who don't want a physical document eventually, then just issuing a digital one is much, much cheaper for everyone, for the government to produce it and for the citizen to buy it as well. So that's great. For those digital versions that they're going to bring out, what they said is for companies to access them, we need to make sure that they have the best cyber security, the best technology, the best practices, etc. So we're going to create what we call a trust framework. And only companies that meet this very high level will get a government kite mark and be certified. And then they can then access the digital passports, digital driving licenses when they come out for purposes of ID, right? Perfect. So companies like ours, and I'll continue if that's okay, because it's important context. Although boring, but I think it's important context. So companies like ours, 3-4 years ago, have all spent and invested very, very heavily to be certified onto this government trust framework. Called the DIATF, and it's significant. I mean, it's deep into 6 figures, probably a couple of $100,000, right? And just the certification alone is 20-odd grand. It gets refreshed every year, recertified every 3 years. It's very, very high. You have to change your product. A lot of admin that goes around it. So 45 companies have done that, and we've been in lockstep with the government. And as recently as last month, the very first digital version of a physical ID document was released, and that was the veterans card. There's only about 300,000 of them in the UK of these cards. They wanted to get the first digital one out on a small sample, right, which made a lot of sense.
It's almost a pilot.
Yeah, exactly that, right?
Yeah.
And so, as a veteran myself, I've got a physical veterans card. I now have a digital one. So if I go somewhere, I can hand it over in person. If I want to access something online, a discount, for example, online, rather than taking photos of it, I can now use the one on my phone, right? It's great. And that was as recently as a month ago. Then about 3 weeks ago, as you said, it was starting to be trailed in the press. We started to see stories that, within the next couple of days, the Prime Minister is going to announce a national ID, right? A digital one, but a national ID.
And for a specific reason.
Well, actually, interestingly, initially it wasn't. It was just a national ID. If you actually go back and look at the press, right, with it, so visceral was the response of the public, because what they were doing, they're flying flags, as they do, right?
Testing.
So it started off as a national ID, right? Mandatory. A few days later, when the Prime Minister got on the stage, it softened to, it wasn't a national ID. What it is a right to work, right? So it's a national digital ID that allows you'll only need it for right to work. It's not mandatory. You don't need it unless you
mandatory only on the basis that if you want to work, you have to have it.
Unless you ever want to change your job or have a job again, right?
Yeah.
And even if you're a contractor, even to get a new contract, right? You have to have this. So it's mandatory in all but name. But that's an example of the softening, right? It went from a national ID to suddenly a right to work tool, right? So it's softened already as a result of the visceral reaction.
But softened in terms of the explanation, not necessarily the product itself.
No, I mean, arguably it's mandatory in all but name, right? But even then, within days, suddenly government communications were not just about right to work. And I'll come back as to the efficacy of whether they'll do what it says anyway. But suddenly they were saying, well, you can use this for right to rent as well. So you can rent an apartment. And if you go back to last Thursday, Friday, the end of last week, suddenly government communications, both through the Labour Party, which is interesting, and through the Prime Minister's social media and communications office, were, you can use this to move house for free. Now, suddenly, right. Now it's not true, right? You can't rent a flat and you can't move house and using this proposed digital national ID.
Just with the ID.
No,
because the ID has to attach to other rights.
Because it's 1/10 of the compliance that you need to do, right?
Yes.
So characterising it in that way is either incompetent because it means they don't understand the compliance required to buy or sell a house, right? Or it's deliberately deceitful, right? And let me put it this way. You can't buy a house using this proposed national ID card any more than it will stop anyone getting on a boat or any more than it'll stop a bad employer employing anyone illegally, right?
Yeah.
Now, what you've got to bear in mind is 45 companies have invested heavily to be certified, right? And we've got digital ID. When the passport comes out, the driving license comes out later this year, anyone can do anything that this card is proposed to be doing. They can have a digital ID, a passport, without it being a national centralised government-run ID. And the key thing is this hasn't cost the government anything. Right? The private sector have done this and we do it really well. We're really elegant, beautiful technology solutions, and we do it millions of times a year. I mean, we run millions of checks for right to work. And the new proposed solution, which will cost billions, is a big tech government project, which, we all remember Horizon and the NHS system.
And NHS IT and so on, all of these systems that have been launched and then abandoned because they haven't worked or they've fallen over at huge, huge cost. Yes.
And this proposed government one won't do anything more than what the digital passport and the digital driving license were going to do.
Yeah.
What's critical, though, is that it wasn't in the manifesto. There is no consultation across government. There's no consultation.
So no one's voted for this.
With industry, right? There's no public support, no cross-party support. And it came out of the blue, if I'm honest, right? As an industry, we didn't know this was coming, apart from when they started to fly flags just 72 hours beforehand. So
literally in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it was in the press about 3 days before then the Prime Minister got up and announced it, right? And interestingly, what typically, and you know this, Russell, what typically happens with government announcements is there's a significant period of time where they have an idea, right? And that gets refined, there's consultation, it gets planned out, it gets costed. You build cross-party support, public support. The very last bit of that is somebody standing on a stage behind a lectern and announcing it.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to get away from the fact that in this one with the digital ID, the first thing that happened is somebody got on a stage at a lectern and announced it. And since then, it's been very much how is this going to work? And it's softening and changing all the time. I was in Parliament last week, just the absolute absurdity of this. I was in Parliament last week watching a debate, and the minister said, to avoid digital exclusion, there'll be a physical version of this national digital ID card. It's absurd.
So Howard, it sounds to me like you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way, I'm trying to be balanced here. I'm not here with a political hat on for a change. You're suggesting that this is a fait accompli for a start, that it's being launched and then they'll work out not just how to execute on it, but the reasons for which they want to advance as to why it's palatable to the public. So in other words, we're doing it for our own reasons, but we're going to tell you by way of justification that it does these 4 or 5 things, even though when you peel away the layers of that justification, it's no such thing. It doesn't replace your product, for instance, at Credas. It doesn't do the things it says on the tin from the government announcements perspective, but they are determined to introduce it. So I have to peel away further, I suppose, which is, why do we think the government are really introducing national mandatory ID cards digitally? What's the real reason?
It's absolutely the core question. By the way, the way you just characterised it is correct. Look, I'm not answering this in my capacity as CEO of Credas. We try and keep off, but I can tell you what the main areas of speculation are, and they are twofold. Is that this being announced without it being in the manifest, any consultation, etc.
Suddenly.
And it not doing the things that they're selling it on.
Yes.
Right. Nobody buys.
So do we think this stops the small boats?
No. Do we think
Of course not.
Do we think it stops bad employers from employing people illegally?
Yeah.
Of course, if you're not going to suddenly check somebody's passport now, you're not going to check the.
Would it have helped us find that escaped sex offender out of Chelmsford Prison recently quicker than the 3 days it took the police to get a call from the public to tell them that he was in a park?
No. So all of these ways of selling it, when you pick away, they either have already been solved, right, or they just won't work, right? So the why is an interesting one. So the speculation it largely centres around 2 areas, really. One, that it was an attempt by the Prime Minister to out-reform reform. So we're having ID cards, whether anyone likes it or not, because he's announced it by the end of this Parliament, by the way. And this is a big tech project to pull off by the end of this Parliament, but whether it can be delivered is a separate question, right? But that the announcement.
So that's the aim, to get this out before there's a general election.
Correct, right? And again, why the unseemly haste? You'd have to ask why. But anyway, so people speculate that there's 2 reasons really that have driven this out of the blue announcement without any sort of planning for it at all. Number one is a political reason to try and out-reform reform, which, if that was the case, I mean that's spectacularly blown up in their face, because nobody buys it, do they? Nobody buys that.
But Reform are against ID cards.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's given an own goal, and the public are against ID cards. So, I mean,
because it's matched with 1930s Germany.
It's spectacularly bungled if the reason they've rushed this in is an anti-reform move, right? Because it's achieved the opposite. A big part of speculation is the influence, and you referenced it earlier, of the Tony Blair Institute. Look, Blair was very pro national ID cards. The public weren't, so there never has been a mandate for it actually from the public. And interestingly, the Tony Blair Institute, a lot of their alumni are now, as a matter of fact, they're at the heart of government and involved in setting government policy. So
the Fabian Society?
I guess there's a lot of speculation that it's been driven from that quarter. The reality is I don't know, right? And I don't know why.
So shall I speculate?
I suspect you're going to, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's just speculate as and again, I don't even think this is political. I think this is just that there is a belief by some quarters, and not just politicians, but a globalist view almost, that the state knows best. Big state rather than small state. Have the state to be that entity that the public lean into in terms of reliance in every respect. Free breakfasts, benefits, digital ID cards, right? Those 3 things are 3 sides of the same coin, in my opinion. I would speculate, and again, I'm no big conspiracy theorist, I don't believe in UFOs or anything like that, but let me tell you where I think this is going. This is Orwellian, in my opinion, on the basis that it will allow the government to control aspects of our lives that they can't currently control. For instance, where we go, what we spend, what we eat, how we travel. If that controlling nature, let's say in this quest for net zero, let's park the rights and wrongs of net zero for a second, but if you have an ID card that is linked to your health records, your spending habits, your location, your travel habits, your bank, and so on, the government not only has access to your behaviour, but it means it can turn certain aspects off. If they believe that your BMI is too high, they can stop you buying chocolate. Seriously. You might laugh, but these things happen in a slippery slope, salami slice kind of way. If they believe someone like me that's travelled 5 or 6 times on aeroplanes this year already has done that too much, even though I'm doing it in the course of my business, they might stop me buying a plane ticket, and so on. So this, I think, actually we have cause as the public, forget the political parties for a second, to be very, very concerned indeed about a state that effectively wants to snoop on us and our habits and our behaviour so that it can then in turn potentially control it. I think, I'm afraid, because it is a kind of left-wing doctrine, I think that is what this is about. And further, there's been a lot said about social media over the last few months, particularly after the summer riots and, behaviour around migrant hotels and the whole kind of immigration debate. And again, parking that to one side for a second in terms of the ins and outs and the rights and wrongs, it could also be applied that if you misbehave on social media, if you say things that the state don't like, you'll have privileges withdrawn, almost on what would be called a social credits basis. So in other words, we all start with a certain amount of social credits. If I lose those social credits, I lose my privileges. A bit like being in jail. Not that I'm talking from experience, by the way. Would you agree with any of that?
So, look, there are genuine and widespread civil liberties concerns around a national ID. Outside of times of war, we've never had them in this country. And my big argument on all of that is we don't need it, right? What the government have been working on for the last few years, and by the way, it started by the Tories and it continued by Labour, right? And it only stopped last month, is a solution that had public support. You can have a physical passport, or you can choose a digital one, or you can have both, right? And everyone's cool with that, right?
But they're not going to track you or stop you buying bread or flying on a plane.
No, they're not, right? And yeah, if the argument you're putting forward is the case,
do you think I'm being over the top in that speculation? Do you think any of those things that I've just articulated, and I'm kind of doing this again just to give not an extreme argument, but I guess an argument of the possible. Do you think any of the things that I've said could be done? Roll forward 5 or 10 years, assuming that we have the same political masters in 5 or 10 years' time. I mean, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that a left-leaning government might introduce some of the things that I've just suggested.
No, I mean, look, I'm trying to be measured, I guess, in my response, right? If that is the way things go, this is how it starts, right? So if that is the way, if that is the destination,
read 1984 and Animal Farm by George Orwell. Just do that.
Yeah. So people who believe that is a risk, this is how it would start. I'll go as far as saying that. The big thing I focus on is that we don't need to be spending billions of pounds of our money as taxpayers producing a big government tech project, which they are useless at doing, that was aiming to replace the private sector one that they told us to make and encourage and made us all
which is honed and being built properly.
And by the way, which has public support, has industry support, and had government support until a month ago when somebody stood on a stage and said something completely different and drove a coach and horses.
And I presume your sector wasn't consulted on this?
Not at all, right? So what they've done to a sector in the UK, which is growing, booming, and seen as a global leader, right? Well in advance, our ID verification, AML technology solutions are well in advance of places like the United States, for example. A lot of our companies are going to cross and internationalize in other jurisdictions. And effectively what it's done is just obliterated that in terms of the investment.
So they're taking the value
landscape.
out of it.
They don't understand the damage you do. And a bit like the housing market, when you start flying kites around taxation policies and mansion taxes, etc., you've got to understand there's a real world impact of that.
There's a behavioural change.
As families, it really impacts families, right? Whether they're going to move or not, whether they can take a job or not, right? These things are really damaging. There's a responsibility to govern in a responsible way. So bringing it back closer to home, if you stand on a stage and announce a policy with no mandate, not in your manifesto, no consultation, just bang it out there, having encouraged the entire sector to invest and do it the way you want to do previously, which everyone supports, that clearly it has not been welcome at all, if I'm honest. And I think it's regrettable it's been done in this way, and I don't think it's necessary. And I think whether they can deliver it is questionable, if I'm honest.
Well, I think the saving grace, and I say this with a bit of tongue in cheek, is that governments generally, particularly this one actually, you could argue quite comfortably, I think, they don't have a record of competence when it comes to fulfilling the things that they say they're going to do, particularly when it comes to technology, as you rightly say. And there are a whole bunch of examples as to how technology has failed the public sector. I mean, let's look at the post office debacle for a start.
Well, let me bring it really, really relevant, right? The current government app called One Login has already had massive security breaches,
data breaches
in and around it already. And this is where they want to put this.
So is there a risk that, the 80 million population of Britain, let's say there's 55, 60 million adults, whatever it is, that their entire lives are then held in a vault that is owned by the government somewhere? Is it at all possible? Is it plausible at all, in your experience, that data might be at risk of being hacked?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
And that's scary stuff.
And that it's not benign. I mean, we have China, we have bad actors, we have criminals actively trying to get into these things all of the time.
Yeah, either to cause trouble or to steal data and content that can make them money, particularly when it comes to falsifying IDs and assuming the identity of people for the purposes of, nefarious loans and mortgages or whatever. So huge risk. If the answer is, I'll look at the camera as I say this, do you think actually that the government will have an absolutely unblemished and cast iron approach to this when it comes to your cybersecurity and the likelihood of your details not being compromised? I don't think there's anybody that could really look themselves in the eye and say, yeah, I trust the government to look after my data with integrity. It really isn't going to happen.
I wouldn't trust the government to look after my plan plot, if I'm honest, right? And it'd still be like, this is a really key point, right? This is such a touch point issue. This is so universally despised by the public, by opposition MPs, even within the Labour Party, right? There's no love for this policy particularly, right? And in the press, amongst the public, is that to railroad this through, you'd have to be a pretty strong government anyway, with a massive majority and a strong grip on power. How you get this through with such an unstable government and with so little ability to govern, I guess for those who do have concerns, probably your biggest area of confidence would be on a lack of ability to deliver.
Well, they've got to get it through, then they've got to execute on it in terms of not just the legislation, but actually delivering on the product as such and then rolling it out.
Here's an example of how little thought through it is, right? Currently, for right to work in the UK, if you've got an Irish or a British passport, right, you can show that either remotely through a Credas or a Yoti or someone, or physically when you turn up for your job. Yeah. Now, if you're going to issue national IDs to all British citizens, fine, right? I mean, absurd, but fine. So what are you going to be doing for Irish citizens? Who are EU citizens? Are you going to be issuing EU citizens a British government national ID so they can come? It's absurd. I mean, clearly it's not going to work. And that's just the first question that immediately rolls off the tongue. No answers to any of that.
So I think we can have confidence that based on current and recent form, this government probably won't roll this out successfully. So maybe we don't have too much to worry about. And if they do, it will take them so long. By that time, I think it's fair to say, although 4 years is a very, very long time in politics, let alone a week, it's likely there'll be a change of government. So perhaps we haven't got too much to worry about.
No, but you can spend many billions of pounds in the next 4 years.
Of taxpayers' money. And I wonder actually how much of this is driven by some kind of commercial imperative where there's been some lobbying by certain technology firms. And again, I'll just speculate here for a second that it was muted, maybe incorrectly, that one of the individuals involved in the rollout of this technology is the chap that runs a business that does this thing, as its kind of core function, and that business is run by Tony Blair's son.
Yeah. So
now, again, I see this speculation, and it seems to have some substance. But if Tony Blair is seen to be pushing a piece of legislation that allows for a member of his family's business to profit from it, and he has managed to get the ear of Keir Starmer and the front bench, well, look, welcome to the latest Labour Party scandal.
Yeah, I mean, look, I won't comment on that particular speculation, but what is fact is that big American data and tech giants want to get involved in ID. I mean, it was only in the press this morning, actually, that in some states, the US government are going to bring out a digital passport, and Apple have said that's the first place that they're going to have it is in their Apple Wallet. Google Wallet in the UK have said they're going to become certified and be the 46th certified company in the UK to use these digital versions, right? So big tech, particularly big California tech, wants a piece of the ID pie. And the reason being is they have access to a lot of our data and behavioural habits at the minute. But every time you access an age-restricted website, every time you buy a bottle of wine, every time you go travel or hire a car, it's a whole area at the minute, which currently the state issue the documents, you can access those services. Suddenly, big American tech can access them. And that is a fact. What is also a fact, actually, is one of the major founders of the Tony Blair Institute is Oracle Corporations.
Okay, who are a tech business that might be involved in the creation of such platforms. We can only speculate. Tim Barnett. Wow, okay, that got very interesting, didn't it? Look, this has been a fascinating series of discussions with Tim Barnett here, CEO of Credas. Yes, I hope that you enjoy as much as I have watching these and getting some insight into the Credas business, the Credas wallet, Tim Barnett himself, and of course, look, our own opinions as individuals, I think it's fair to say, on the ridiculous concept that is this notion of government-sponsored, mandated digital IDs. Tim, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Russell.